anything, so the composite bows of the black-scaled lizardman that others had were either extremely expensive or counterfeits. But how he doesn't understand why Owen is taking out his bow already? It's still too far, but as if rebutting the man's thoughts, Owen didn't hesitate to take his shot, and the distance between him and the gnolls was still over 100 steps. So the gnolls who were marching with their heads down hadn't spotted Owen, and only as the bowstring was released did one gnoll catch a fleeting glimpse of Owen, but it was too late for any defensive action. Luckily, the arrow just struck the ground amidst their ranks, and clueless of the arrow's true nature. The gnolls initially mistook it for a regular misplaced shot, and so the leader shouted to alert his mates of an enemy attack. However, he soon realized that his attempts were futile. He was already too late, as he could already feel the chills rush through their bodies, making their hairs stand, and suddenly, an intense burst of thunderbolt descended from where the arrow had been, which in turn made the gnolls close their eyes, but their eyelids didn't completely shield them from the intense light, and then the electricity soon reached them, electrifying them just enough to let them barely alive. With this, one of the gnolls then remembered the famous legend among the black-scaled lizardmen, the Chosen Ones, and it was no doubt that they were against one such formidable figure, so they immediately decided to run as fast as they could. At the same time, the man was left in awe at the display of Owen's formidable abilities. The scene where Owen effortlessly overpowered the gnolls with a single, strategically placed arrow revealed a level of skill and power that was both impressive and intimidating. Meanwhile, Owen, who was seemingly accustomed to such feats, was just sheepishly smiling as he watched the gnolls flee in panic and disarray. He was satisfied with the outcome, knowing that sparing their lives meant they were unlikely to seek immediate revenge. After the confrontation was resolved, Owen took the opportunity to introduce himself to the man, which in turn surprises him, as he couldn't believe that he was in the presence of an important figure, Owen the storyteller, which flattered Owen, but he modestly downplayed his importance, suggesting that he wasn't as significant as the man believed, and because it's been a while since he used his power, Owen suggested to take a break and just talk for a moment. During this pause, Owen took out a long stick. The end of the stick was round and was then filled with grass and was lighted up, so that he could breathe a white smoke out from his mouth. Meanwhile, he just stood there and wasn't surprised by this at all, as he knew what the stick was. It's a smoking pipe and tobacco, the ritual tool that the chosen black-scaled lizard men use. Still, we couldn't help but wonder if the lizard men really needs to smoke that Zaza after they use their power. While pondering this, he respectfully gave Owen space to enjoy his session, patiently waiting for him to finish before they would continue their conversation. But since Owen is hitting that pipe and was feeling the vibe around him, he immediately noticed the man's silence, and so he told Huey that he can ask him things if he wants to. This prompted the man to ask why he goes around alone when he has that much power, but this just made Owen slightly puzzled. So he responded that he doesn't understand what he meant by that, because how would he go around alone if he didn't have this power, or if he were weak as shit for that matter? And the man couldn't find fault in his logic, so he decided to make his question clearer, and ask Owen again, the reason why does he follow someone when he is this powerful? There would be others who follow him within the black-scaled lizardmen tribe, and even if there isn't, he would be able to find other lizardmen somewhere out there and live a comfortable life. And from what he knows, the storyteller Owen always goes around alone, like a vagrant, only and dangerous, but this just made Owen laugh as if he just heard a funny story. After that, Owen soberly explained that he had his own reasons for his actions, mentioning that he carried the weight of many sins. This surprised the man, since he had witnessed so many lizard men that respect him, which Owen clarified that he is indeed a sinner. But it is also true that he has been forgiven by many of those in their tribe, but the feeling that he has is more of a personal atonement issue. He can't forgive himself. With these simple words, the man understood what he meant, and as the man nodded, Owen assured him that there was no need for sympathy, as he had discovered his own path to self-forgiveness, and this was it. He goes around telling stories of the blue insect god and Rakarak the tribal chief through storytelling and writing, and sometimes giving fear as well. After all that was cleared up, Owen tucked away his smoking pipe and asked, where is he heading? As he seemed like a vagrant as well. With a thoughtful scratch of his beard, saw no reason to conceal the truth. So he answered truthfully that he is not a vagrant, and he came from Automation. Automation was an isolated valley located at the southwest end of the wilderness. A human tribe had settled down where the springs flowed, and at the entrance of the valley was a fortress made from soil. It was called a fortress, but it actually wasn't built by humans. It was named Automation because, through an ancient mystery, there existed ancient mud soldiers reaching a human's waist in height that continuously restored the fortress when it broke down. And because of this, the human tribe that succeeded in occupying the place were able to protect themselves from the other large tribes. Automation was also a place that the ears-cut gnolls and black-scaled lizardmen were keeping an eye on, and it seems like we is an errand boy from Automation, and he is on his way to the black-scaled lizardmen to deliver the words of the Lord of Automation. And so Owen immediately apologized as he didn't recognize a guest, but this was a good coincidence for him, which made who he puzzled. So he asks what he meant by that, but Owen didn't answer it and just whistled, and in the distance, a silhouette of a beast suddenly materialized. But as it drew close, it revealed to be a harsh-looking chicken which was about 2.5 meters tall, and how he only knew one monster with this kind of look. So he assumed that it was a cockatrice, which Owen immediately clarified that it's a quokka, not a cockatrice, and so the man then realized what it was. This is that famous cockatrice and chicken crossbreed. Still, he is not sure how the Lizardman even made it possible, as the quokkas were a creature that only a small portion of the Lizardmen warriors could ride. Overall, it had the appearance of a cockatrice, but it was smaller and more gentle. The black-scaled lizardmen weren't able to tame cockatrices, but they did succeed in crossbreeding quokka. Alongside the chosen ones, these quokka warriors were one of the main reasons the black-scaled lizardmen had a both prestige and evil reputation. Since quokkas can run several times faster than people, and the black lizardmen can shoot their composite bows hundreds of steps away from their targets. But since Huey's is their guest, he doesn't have to feel scared, and Owen already made up his mind that he should also treat him generously, and so he invited Huey's to join him on his quokka, as he was planning to visit Rakrak as well. This gesture of offering a ride was both practical and courteous, allowing Huey's to travel more comfortably and efficiently, but this wasn't free either, as Owen playfully told him that he will have to listen to his stories along the way, which made Huey's let out a soft and concerned laugh. As he realized that their journey will be a long one, true to his word, Owen began to share stories about the blue insect god and the saga of Rakrak. At a later time, within black-scaled lizardmen tribe, their flag soared proudly, the tribe was on the move again, venturing through the wilds to reach a new destination. But now their travel methods had evolved, showcasing a readiness for any future challenges, as each warrior was mounted, vigilantly safeguarding the tribe members and their herd, and leading the way was Rakrak, perched atop a massive monstrous bird, and from his elevated position, Rakrak could effortlessly survey the entire surroundings. Those who had never met Rakrak wouldn't know, but the black-scaled lizardmen hadn't completely failed in taming cockatrices. The large monstrous bird was a cockatrice that was over 3.5 meters tall, and Rakrak was the only individual who somewhat succeeded in taming one. One could think it was a shame there was only one special case, but it was due to the success of taming the large monstrous bird that the quokkas were born. But as he was minding his business, an errand boy suddenly came to him and whispered that Stargazer wanted to see him now, which shocked Rakrak. This could only mean one thing, and so, he turns his cockatrice, and command for the procession to stop. As Rakrak shouted, each lizardman warrior in the middle of the other processions repeated his words to all the other lizardmen. The processions of black-scaled lizardmen that were large enough to make dust clouds instantly stopped at Rakrak's orders. While Rakrak immediately went towards where Stargazer was, and as Rakrak got down from the large monstrous bird, Jal, who was following behind him, came down from her quokka and asked what's wrong, to which Rakrak explained that Stargazer had requested to see him, while also saying that his life is on the line, which Jael understood, so she lets Rakrak be, but she couldn't hide her emotions, remarking that it would be a sad night, which Rakrak was well aware, and that old wise man has correctly predicted the days ahead of them as well as his own, so he thinks that Stargazer will be correct again this time. And so Rakrak continued to walk to Stargazer. The old lizardman had done a lot for Rakrak and the black-scaled lizardmen. He went by many names because he refused to respond to only one name, but now, he was most commonly referred to as the Elder by the tribe members. As Stargazer had first led Rakrak and his clan from the hill with the tower, all the way to where the frogmen had initially settled down, and after that, he led them to more places farther away, and Rakrak had learned how to look at the stars from him. So the two always talked about stars. Stargazer even named the stars, so others would be able to learn as well, and as a result, the warriors, herbalists, and buffalo herders all learned how to read the stars to prevent getting lost. Before, the lizardmen had always learned about the earth and believed that the earth provided them with everything, and thus they weren't too keen on learning things about the sky. But as time passed, they came to realize that knowledge about the sky was useful. Those who went away from the tribe and got lost, found their ways back by looking at the stars, and those who wanted to sleep by the rivers looked at how low the birds flew, and by the movement of the stars, the lizardmen were able to know when flowers bloomed and when plants withered. The intelligent black-scaled lizardmen wanted to gain more knowledge of the earth than the sky, so they would go to Stargazer to discuss and explore more about where the stars came from, how the positions of the stars had changed, and how they would change in the future. And oftentimes, the end of another busy day would find Rakrak sitting down with Stargazer, tired but with a languid look on his face. Stargazer would sit with his back hunched but his eyes shining, and they would exchange questions and answers between them. Rakrak used to give gifts to thank Stargazer for continuously teaching the young lizardman about his wisdom, even though he was old and tired, but Stargazer always turned the gifts down with a wave of his hand, believing that he couldn't accept this considering all that the tribal chief has done for him. As the tribal chief was the one who accepted him even when he was a vagrant. In response, Rakrak insisted that there was no need for thanks. He pointed out that it wasn't just him who had welcomed Stargazer, but the entire tribe had accepted him. While Stargazer agreed with Rakrak's sentiment, he still felt indebted to at least one person, and suggested Rakrak to take the gifts back, and Stargazer was good with words, so it was hard for Rakrak to win an argument with him. However, Rakrak was quick-witted. He would quickly hide his gifts in Stargazer's tent when Stargazer wasn't looking during their conversations, and when Stargazer found these gifts and brought them back to Rakrak, asking where they came from, Rakrak would say he knew nothing of them. They spent many years making these small jokes, but Rakrak suddenly realized that these small jokes would come to an end, and he felt like a part of his heart was tearing apart. Then as Rakrak entered Stargazer's tent, a herbalist who was beside Stargazer's bed, got up. In turn, he immediately inquired if Stargazer was okay. Respectfully, the herbalist answered that the elder has lived a very long time, and is very exhausted now, and with Stargazer's eyes half closed, he opened his mouth and added that he is also tired, as he had studied a lot and taught a lot of people. He has traveled back and forth, here and there, even to places he has never been. He has lost an arm, got kicked out, and remained as a loner for a long time. There will always come a time when they become extremely exhausted. As far as he knows, there's only one cure to this illness, and that is to sleep forever, and Rakrak just slowly nodded and admitted what he hadn't wanted to admit, and sat beside Stargazer, and all that remained in the tent was Rakrak, Stargazer, and a torchlight flickering in the background, setting a somber tone for their conversation. And so Rakrak started the conversation by casually mentioning that he had heard that Stargazer wanted to see him. Attempting Stargazer to explain that was because he wanted to indulge in some extravagance before he leaves. This puzzled Rakrak, so he asked what he meant by that. Which Stargazer replied that he thinks time is very valuable. He has lived his life without greed and tried to take as little as possible of what belonged to others, but this is his last moment. So he wanted to steal time from the busiest lizard men in this tribe. This made Rakrak laugh. Still, he doesn't think Stargazer would have called him just for one last joke, which Stargazer confirmed, and disclosed the real purpose behind summoning him, and that he has a question, one that only Rakrak was deemed worthy enough to answer, but before posing his question, he told Rakrak to think of it as a question not for Tribal Chief Rakrak, but for High Priest Rakrak, the first chosen one, and the one closest to God, which Rakrak understood, so he asked Stargazer to proceed, and so Stargazer started to inquire what happens after death. And when he confirmed Stargazer was no longer breathing, he called the herbalist in, while the blue butterfly flew out of the tent and continued flying into the sky, over the black-scaled lizardmen tribe as they busily prepared for encampment in the funeral, then the wilderness where dusk had arrived. Finally, the blue butterfly landed on the back of another hand. It was Nebula, and he knew well what happens when someone dies in the lost world, and the conditions for creating the afterlife have been completed, so Nebula didn't hesitate to create it. Nebula knew he would eventually create an afterlife someday. After a PLA, Rakrak's question to Rakrak about the afterlife was a testament to his depth of insight as one of the more perceptive members of the black-scaled lizardmen tribe, but Rakrak, who is usually a figure of authority and knowledge within the tribe, found himself unexpectedly at a loss for words in response to this profound question, and despite being well-versed in the tales and rituals that the tribe held about death, and having witnessed significant battles where many warriors lost their lives, Rakrak realized the limitations of his knowledge on this subject. He had always offered prayers for the deceased, hoping they would find peace in a better place. However, he acknowledged the uncertainty that surrounded this belief. The true knowledge of what happens after death remained a mystery, one that he could not unravel until he himself passed away, and observing Rakrak's silence, which seemed to indicate he was carefully contemplating how to articulate his thoughts, Stargazer continued with his line of questioning. He pondered if the fate of the departed souls would enter a state of eternal dreaming, and if in such a dream, they lose their sense of identity and purpose, existing in a realm beyond comprehension, and the anxiety in his voice was evident, reflecting a deep concern about the unknown, a concern shared by Rakrak. But still, the question remained unanswered, and so Stargazer's questions then took a darker turn, asking if there is also a possibility of eternal nightmares. But Rakrak, who wasn't sure either, hesitated, and just asked why Stargazer thinks he is worthy enough to answer that question, showing to Stargazer that he was also in the dark about this subject. But Stargazer believes that Rakrak has a possible answer, he just doesn't know where to start looking for it. This prompted for Stargazer to offer his perspective on the subject. He reflected on how the blue insect god had been their guiding light during times of loss and despair. Based on this belief, he expressed hope that the same deity would continue to guide them in the afterlife. However, this was only a speculation of immortal lizard men like him, and so he still felt the need to sought confirmation from Rakrak, asking if this notion aligned with God's will, and Rakrak pondered deeply over this profound question. After careful consideration, he agreed with Stargazer, affirming that the blue insect god, who had guided them in life, would likely extend that guidance beyond death. With this, Stargazer had a somewhat satisfied look on his face, yet he delved deeper into the topic by asking Rakrak what kind of place he imagined the afterlife to be, prompting Rakrak to share his vision of the afterlife. He imagined it as a vast expanse, where one could run endlessly, feeling the ground crunch underfoot and the meadows gently brushing against one's tail. This depiction painted a picture of boundless freedom and comfort, a stark contrast to the limitations of their current physical forms. Stargazer, initially remarking on his own inability to run due to age, was reminded by Rakrak that in the afterlife, they would shed their old bodies. This realization brought a sense of nostalgia to Stargazer, who recalled the days of his youth when he could walk and run freely. Finding common ground in this shared vision, Rakrak further described a landscape where one could rest on a large boulder when tired, suggesting a serene and peaceful environment. This led Stargazer to inquire about the weather in such a place, which Rakrak immediately answered that it'll always be good, but he then took it back, as he thinks that it wouldn't be fun if it's always the same, so sometimes it'll be gloomy and rainy. And now that he thinks of it, it would also be nice if there's a river, and Stargazer, being encapsulated by Rakrak's vision, then added that he wants there to be a house that he can rest in, to which Rakrak responded that there would likely be various forms of shelter available, such as structures made of mud or wood, or even tents. However, Stargazer expressed a specific aversion to tents, revealing a deeper sentiment. He had grown weary of a nomadic lifestyle, which tents symbolized to him. The idea of constantly moving from one place to another had become unappealing to the elder, who now longed for a more permanent and stable dwelling. Upon hearing this, Rakrak realized that he hadn't fully understood Stargazer's experiences and feelings, so he apologized for not realizing it sooner, but Stargazer just shook his head, reassuring him that there was no need for regret, since he found a place for his heart to settle down at, so he has no other complaints while he is still alive. After he dies is the problem, and so Rakrak continued to elaborate on his vision of the afterlife, assuring Stargazer that the house he longed for would indeed exist there, a sturdy one that doesn't move anywhere. It might be a house built with rocks, offering the permanence and stability Stargazer craved, and with the topic of shelter settled, Stargazer's curiosity turned to the subject of food in the afterlife, and so Rakrak shared that he would probably always be able to eat as much as he wants, and it seems like everything would be there. But Stargazer thinks he might feel lonely being alone in a big place like that, but Rakrak shrugged, as he believed that Stargazer wouldn't be alone. There are already those who have gone before them, and even Rakrak and the others will all be there someday, so Stargazer won't be lonely, and when the time comes that they meet again, they can then talk about stars. As they still have lots to talk about, this surprised Stargazer, so he curiously asked Rakrak if he truly believes that there will be stars there as well, to which Rakrak immediately answered yes. Even he, who was unsure of the afterlife, replied as if it was obvious this time, and this was because the stars always show them the way, so there will be those who wander around lost there too, and God will have definitely put stars in the sky, for them to easily find a way back. This reasoning resonated with Stargazer, bringing a smile to his face as he found solace in Rakrak's words. However, as the conversation drew to a close, Stargazer's energy seemed to wane, and as Rakrak was tending to Stargazer, he noticed a blue butterfly entered the tent and was trying to land on the back of his hand. It was a sign, an answer from the blue insect god, a sign of positivity, and so Rakrak smiled, as he now knows the blue insect god had been listening to their conversation, and so he excitedly pointed out to Stargazer if he sees this as well, while Rakrak slowly brought his hand in front of Stargazer's eyes, so the butterfly wouldn't fly away. However, there was no response from Stargazer, and for a moment, Rakrak feared the worst, so Rakrak was about to shake Stargazer's body, thinking he had died, but then he realized Stargazer was still with him, and was just quietly saying something, asking if he was still around, which Rakrak softly answered that he was, but now it was clear that Stargazer had lost his vision, death was approaching for him. This realization filled Rakrak with a sense of sorrow, since the blue butterfly was known amongst the black-scaled Lizardmen tribe as a sign of positivity, as well as miracles. Even if it wasn't this butterfly which glowed with a mysterious blue light, the Lizardmen were always happy when they saw any blue butterfly, thinking it was a good sign, and Stargazer would certainly recognize it too, so Rakrak was agonizing, but then he suddenly remembered the small joke he would make with Stargazer, so he immediately asked Stargazer if he was still there, which he confirmed, and so Rakrak told him that he brought him a gift, and he will leave it here, and just like before, Stargazer knew that even if he declines Rakrak's gift, he would just be fooling around and sneak it somehow, and so Stargazer confidently murmured that he will find it right away this time, with a smile on his face, and as the last breath of Stargazer reached the blue butterfly flapped its wings and flew away from Rakrak's hand. Rakrak somehow knew it was his last breath. Rakrak lightly shook Stargazer's body while calling his name. Years selected their first tribe, and the NPCs in the surrounding areas were defeated. A player's divinity level would reach 11. It was one of the required conditions to create an afterlife, and a player could reach the level if they played properly in the beginning. Then they would be called semi-deities. At that point on, it would be very difficult for XP to increase. Still, it doesn't matter for Nebula, as levels are only one of the additional factors to winning the game, and he is confident that no one would be at a higher level than he is right now. He is on the faster side of meeting all the conditions, level-wise, resource-wise, fate points-wise, and sufficient deaths. Each of these components played a significant role in his overarching plan, but the aspect of deaths held particular importance. This element was crucial in fulfilling the most vital condition for creating an afterlife within the game's universe. The four conditions Nebula focused on were interrelated yet distinct, advancing to the requisite levels and defeating powerful NPCs like abominations and fiends to secure special resources, as well as gathering enough fate points, were relatively straightforward tasks. However, the last condition, related to death, was more enigmatic and complex, because once there were enough deaths of individuals that believed in the player, then the condition was known to be met. However, the specific formula for figuring out how many had to die was not provided in the Lost World, so the players had to make the calculations and figure it out themselves. There were cases where the condition wasn't fulfilled no matter how many had died, and there were cases where the conditions were easily met after the death of only a few individuals. Some say that it depends on how much faith points the individual generated, but that doesn't necessarily add up to Nebula, so he can't figure out what it is, but he has already met the conditions, so he chose not to be bothered by it further, and just focus on what up ahead. With this in mind, Nebula then opened the World Creation Helper version 2. He knew there would come a day where he would create an afterlife, so he had been modeling different kinds of afterlife he wanted from time to time using the World Creation Helper version 2, which was provided by the Lost World system. Just like the Creature Creation Helper Nebula used to make Stratus, there were worlds Nebula had created before, and worlds that other players had made saved in the World Creation Helper program, but just like last time, Nebula decided to make a new one, but the basic framework is pre-made, which was good, and he already knew what kind of afterlife each species preferred from his previous experiences in playing the game. While Lizardmen all generally preferred the same type of afterlife, there was a certain kind of world Lizardmen of a young civilization especially favored: green fields with moist, humid air and warm sunny plains. And Nebula was somewhat relieved when he heard Rakrak and Stargazer imagining and talking about the afterlife, because the afterlife he created wasn't too different from their descriptions. Nebula continued preparing the afterlife by pressing here and there within the World Creation Helper tab. The souls of those who died while having faith in the player would remain rather than disappear. It was up to the players, if they wanted to collect the souls, and most of the time they were collected because that was the only way an afterlife could be created. The souls would be the first ones to set foot in the afterlife Nebula created, and he couldn't just pass on this opportunity since the afterlife was a very important element within the Lost World, as it was a factor in determining the view of life after death for those who believed in a god. For example, if an afterlife of hell was created, a god could show priests the image of hell through dreams. The priests would then learn from the dreams that those who were wicked would receive eternal punishment, and they would then spread that fact to the other believers. That way the priests can tell the believers to uphold morality and ethics, but there's another way to compel them to do so. The concept of hell could be changed depending on a player's abilities and utilization. There were multiple ways to inform believers of what could make them go to hell. Players could have priests tell believers that doing bad things would land them in hell, but they could also have believers think that attacking a certain species, or insulting a specific god, could lead to the same fate. This type of gameplay was common in the Lost World. It was also common for the concept of heaven to be used together with hell, but there would be no reason to believe in a god if hell was the only destination after death, since punishments should always be paired with rewards. And it was also possible to create a world where the believers believed that they would go to heaven if they attacked a certain species, or insulted a specific god, and it was more than a matter of faith since this actually happened in the afterlife, but it wasn't possible for Nebula to create an afterlife of heaven and hell just yet, as he would need at least 2 afterlives, but he can only make one right now. And reincarnation is also difficult, because there would need to be judges. As a result, Nebula was only able to create a type of afterlife called different worlds, and this particular afterlife is useful and a common place throughout history, such as Valhalla, Water of Forgetfulness, Styx, Limbo. They're all different from each other, but they all indicate worlds you would go to after you die. These worlds weren't necessarily individual worlds on their own, but more often used as spaces leading to other afterlives. However, these weren't the only purposes for these worlds. Even in Valhalla, the afterlife was like a training place for warriors getting ready for Ragnarok. Afterlives can really differ depending on how the players want to use them, and now that he thinks about it, there was a time he even won by utilizing the afterlife, but he did just got lucky though, and that is because souls would be immortal as long as an afterlife existed. It was hard to make use of the knowledge or powers that the souls possessed, because it consumed a lot of faith points, but as the game progressed into the later stages, the souls would become very helpful to the players. Nevertheless, there's no need to rush from the start. Many things are still in their inceptions, and so he decided to think flexibly, and just went through the next step, and that is to name his newly created afterlife, which he didn't hesitate to name it the First Prairie. It was a working title, allowing possibility for future expansion. Then the first prairie that was visible in the World Creation Helper appeared below Nebula's feet. Nebula opened his possessions window and scattered all the souls into the first prairie. Hundreds of souls turned into blue wandering butterflies. D himself, there was a soul that Nebula needed to guide personally, and that is Stargazer, who is in a serene slumber upon a lush grass meadow, his rest so deep it was as if he had been craving it for ages. Unexpectedly, a gentle tingle on his snout stirred him awake. He thought he would be forever sleepy, but when he opened his eyes he felt refreshed. Lying down, his arms, legs, and tail moved as he wished. He never thought that the pain in his joints would ever go away, even in a dream. With this Stargazer set up, immediately he was presented with an astonishing view, where at first he thought it was a dream, but as he felt everything in his presence he denounced the thought. As he was now certain that all of this isn't a dream, it was a green grassland. A gentle wind swept past, and Stargazer felt the humid but cool air on his nose. He thought his nose felt cold at first, but soon felt the warmth of the sun on his face. All was good. Then Stargazer easily remembered the last conversation he had with Rakrak. The conversation seemed like it had been a dream, but at the same time so very real and vivid. As he reflected on their exchange, his eyes sparkled with realization. Rakrak had been right. This was the prairie they had envisioned together. However, he noticed the absence of stars and the lack of stone houses they had imagined. It dawned on Stargazer that one doesn't always receive everything they wish for. Perhaps in this realm houses were unnecessary. Still, this insight brought a smile to his face as he recognized the beauty and serenity of this gift from their god, where he found himself in a tranquil paradise, where the sun's warmth was gentle and comforting, never becoming overbearing, and before him stretched an endless expanse of grass, inviting him to run freely in any direction he desired. The breeze seemed to embrace him wholly, welcoming his entire being with open arms. In this moment Stargazer felt a profound sense of peace and fulfillment, as if he had truly found a place where he belonged, a realm that resonated with his deepest desires and aspirations. Stargazer found himself utterly captivated by the splendor of the magnificent place he had arrived in. He became one with the environment, whistling harmoniously with the wind, an act that brought him a deep sense of peace and connection to the world around him. It was the tune that everyone sang after the black-scaled lizardmen defeated the frogmen and the villages were restored. It had a good rhythm, so everyone liked it. But Stargazer always hummed it because he wasn't so good at singing. He was even shy about humming it as well, so he only did it when there was no one around. As he indulged in this serene activity, something in his peripheral vision caught his attention, prompting him to turn his gaze. To his realization, he discovered he was not alone in this tranquil afterlife. Scattered across the vast expanse of grass, he saw other lizardmen. They were lying down, each in their own space, faces turned upwards towards the sky with their eyes peacefully closed. Stargazer found Himself in a state of contemplation as he wandered amidst his resting kin, he debated internally whether to rouse the other lizard-men from their peaceful slumber. Observing their tranquil expressions, he felt it might be discourteous to disturb their rest. This dilemma reflected his deep respect and consideration for his fellow tribesmen, but as he looked at them closely, Stargazer recognized several familiar faces among the resting lizard-men. One in particular caught his eye, a young warrior who had left an indelible mark on his memory. This young lizardman had played a crucial role during a critical moment for the black-scaled lizardmen when they faced an attack from a goblin tribe significantly larger than Rakrak's clan. Stargazer vividly recalled the harrowing encounter. The goblin forces had managed to split Rakrak's clan into two, isolating Rakrak at the front and Ur at the rear. Both leaders swiftly rallied their warriors and mounted a fierce resistance. However, the most vulnerable members of the clan, the children and the elderly, found themselves dangerously exposed in the midst of the chaos. It was during this moment of crisis that the young warrior, whom Stargazer now observed in peaceful rest, had made a significant impact. His bravery and actions during the attack had been instrumental in safeguarding the lives of those caught in the middle of the conflict. As the young warrior had learned arithmetic, he now can understand that it was logical to sacrifice one life to save many others, and so a few youngsters had charged at the dozens of goblins, and through those heroic sacrifices that no one had wished for, the lizardmen were able to defeat the goblin tribe. Some of the lizardmen survived their heroic act, and some didn't. The lizardman warrior in front of Stargazer was one of those that hadn't survived, and Rakrak had been deeply affected by the loss. So he'd gotten mad and yelled at those who survived, and even at those who died at their funerals. He even yelled at Stargazer, and blamed it all on the arithmetic that he taught them, because all the ones who were smart and good at arithmetic went against his orders and charged at the goblins. They were so stupid, sacrificing one life to save two. They thought this was a good exchange, but Rakrak was angrier at this fact, since Rakrak knew they weren't wrong, and there's nothing else he can do than be angry. However, what annoyed Rakrak the most was what happened after that. Someone seemed to have overheard the conversation between Rakrak and Stargazer, and all the other warriors who initially didn't care about arithmetic went to Stargazer to learn afterwards. Since then, the warriors who were good at calculations always died first when there was a fight, and then others would go to Stargazer to learn how to do calculations. Stargazer taught them secretly, being careful not to annoy Rakrak even more. The warrior sound asleep in front of Stargazer was the one who led many other warriors of the clan to learn calculations. Happy to see the warrior, Stargazer put his hand on the warrior's shoulder, but pulled back without shaking the warrior awake, as he decided to wake him up later, as it doesn't seem like there's anything to do in this place anyways, and since he is the only one who is awake, Stargazer assumed that he woke up quicker than the others, because he had died recently, and that the others hadn't escaped the lingering effects of death yet. But since he was alone, he wondered if God is present, as there's something he had wanted to ask. But as he looked for the divine being, he saw a lizardman tail sticking out from between the trees. Without giving an answer, the tail swayed back and forth before disappearing, so it seems there was someone else who was awake, and with this, Stargazer immediately called out to it. But the tail was about to disappear from his field of vision as he did this, and with this, Stargazer stood up and began to walk faster, thinking he might lose the lizardman. Walking fast felt awkward as it was something he hadn't been able to do until now. Then Stargazer broke into a jog and was soon running after the lizardman, whose tail kept appearing and disappearing among the trees. Stargazer remembered that he used to enjoy running like this when he was younger. When he was a child, he used to run with a friend that he couldn't recall the face or name of anymore, and Stargazer didn't feel all that bad while calling after the lizardman. The tail was leading him somewhere. Once he passed through some bushes, a small clearing appeared. There was a stone building, one Stargazer had never seen before. The building was cylindrical, made of rectangular stones, and had a domed ceiling. The tail swayed back and forth at the entrance of the building, and suddenly disappeared as if it had gotten sucked inside. He thought to himself that the person he was chasing won't be able to run away as long as they're in there, and so, Stargazer, whose body was hot from all the running, entered the building. There was a blue light at the end of a dark corridor. The light was familiar to Stargazer, but as he walked by on the dark corridor, he was thinking that maybe there is a possibility that the divine being is here, because if it was the case, he would like to ask a question that had been lingering on his mind. For years, he wanted to know why they were exactly chosen by God, as he couldn't quite understand. Why did the blue insect god save them, protect them, and help them with miracles? Was it because lizardmen were superior to other races? But it seems like it wasn't the case, since the other species seemed to lose either because they didn't have a god, or their gods weren't as powerful as theirs, or was it because God is good, but what makes them better than the other species? Are the other species not as kind-hearted as they are, or is it because they would be useful? Then would it be right for them to rely on God? What if they were no longer useful one day? There was no clear answer to these questions, but Stargazer thought that Raycrack's answer was the best out of all the others, even if it wasn't the right answer. Raycrack always suggested answers that Stargazer liked. Raycrack said it could have been a coincidence that maybe there was no other choice, just like how they couldn't be with better species on a better land. Maybe God did all that he could. In a way, it could sound disrespectful, but Stargazer thought it was okay, because it means that they were the best outcome. And not long after, Stargazer walked through the corridor and came face to face with a night sky. Projected to the ceiling was the same night sky of the world that he was familiar with. The stars weren't drawn, but actual stars that shone on their own, and the depth of the dark sky was no different than the real one, and therefore, he thought to himself that Raycrack was right once again, the stone house, and now the stars. Then Stargazer looked around to find the owner of the tail he had been chasing, but the building was empty. However, Stargazer's attention was already on the night sky, and not the tail. He scanned from one end to the other and realized that the sky was even moving the way he had remembered, but that wasn't the end of it. In the middle of the room, there was a strange mechanical device that looked like it would be found in an ancient ruin. It was a long cylinder made with brass, and there was a round crystal glass embedded on both ends of the cylinder. It was set up on a platform with a chair to sit on, silently inviting one to look into the strange device. For a moment, Stargazer simply stood there, wondering if it would be okay for him to touch the device. He decided it would be fine since there was no one around. After touching different parts of the device, he put his eye to the bottom crystal glass. As soon as he did this, he was visibly shocked from what he saw. As Stargazer repeatedly moved away from the crystal glass to look at the night sky with his naked eyes, and looked back into the glass again, he then loosened and tightened the handle on the cylindrical-shaped device. As he realized that this is what the stars truly looked like, everything he knew before was just superficial, so he felt the need to recalculate the movement of the stars. And Stargazer continuously looked at the mechanical device, without becoming bored of it, when suddenly a thought came to mind. It would be amazing if he could pass this knowledge on to those still alive. In Stargazer's opinion, knowledge about the stars was one of the ways to do calculations, and if one knew how to do calculations, they could figure out the size and location of everything in the world, which would allow them to predict what would happen in the future. But as far as Stargazer could remember, there had never been a time where someone from the dead had returned, and if one can't go back once they are dead, why did God make a place like this? Just to see an old lizardman be happy, but Stargazer knew that couldn't be the case. So he stroked the mechanical device, and remembered what Raycrack had said, that God always does his best. He doesn't do anything for no reason, so he was confident that this knowledge will certainly become useful in the future. As this happened, the God that Stargazer wanted to meet all this time was right behind him, and Nebula was glad that Stargazer followed him well, and his assumptions were right. The afterlife is not only a place for the dead to go, but also hugely influences the view of life after death, and the values of those who believed in God. If warriors went to an afterlife, the species of the warriors would dream of Valhalla, and if immortals with special powers entered the afterlife, their species would dream of a beautiful and peaceful place. Then what if a scholar enters the afterlife? The afterlife would certainly lay the groundwork for technological advancement. Nebula gave Stargazers back a final look before stepping down from the platform and exiting the first observatory, delighted of what Stargazer had contributed, especially since a new threat is approaching. Nebula had been fairly busy for the past few years. He had to take caution of the players that were slowly starting to expand their areas while also assisting Raycrack in defeating the NPCs nearby, and in the past few years, there hadn't been any big problems. Nebula intended to take over the entire peninsula and gather all the Lizardmen, and if time was on his side, he believed it would be possible to do so without running into many issues. The united Lizardmen would naturally gain the upper hand over the other tribes, which would also make them influential. The weaker tribes would have no other choice but to accept and believe in the black-scaled Lizardmen's god. However, a null tribe suddenly appeared from the north. Nebula had to temporarily give up his goal of taking over the peninsula, and led Raycrack's clan north. It was clear that this null tribe belonged to another player rather than stemming from an NPC event. The Ears Cut tribe was a tribe that Nebula should keep an eye out for. They were a large tribe, and since they were a nomadic tribe rather than an agricultural one, their combat power was not to be underestimated. The Lizardmen had Kurokas, and the Gnolls had saber-toothed tigers. The Gnolls hadn't been able to advance their bows much, but their metal-smelting technology was better than the Lizardmen's. It was likely a technique that they obtained from a place Nebula hadn't been able to explore yet. Just by looking at their advancements, the player might be at a similar level as he was. They also might have created an afterlife as well, but this wasn't anything out of his predictions, and there were many ways to deal with the situation. The most important thing at the moment is that he is still on the faster side of meeting all the conditions, and he already made many preparations for war with the players. And now that his afterworld is progressing quickly, he can gladly prepare to welcome this player with open arms. Hit that like button and thanks for watching.